Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is the next installment of the fantastic series by myself, the LBL Type 3. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear. A huge happy birthday to my good sister, Alicia Morgan, over in Michigan, USA. Even with the lockdown, I hope your day has been wonderful and the boys are spoiling you. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The LBL Type 3, Series 2, Chapter 6, A Cryptid Maze. Let's get straight into that. After my transition was a success, myself, Owen and Alicia got prepped and ready for the trip back to the LBL National Park and to rendezvous with Wayne and his team. We loaded up the trucks with heavy artillery and explosives and off for a small army. I took ownership of a reinforced armor-plated 90s Toyota Hilux whilst Alicia drove her Ford F-150 Raptor. Again, this vehicle had major modifications. With our supplies loaded and the final checks on our transport, we were ready to roll out. Before we left, Alicia turned to me and asked, "What's your name? I just realised we never got formally introduced or called your name." I let out a laugh and shook my head. "You're right, sis. I never thought until you mentioned it," I replied, chuckling as I did so. "It's Luke Deadman." "Well, ain't that a peachy name?" Alicia replied, laughing heartily. 10 minutes later, we were hitting the dusty country roads with gusto. I took in my new world in through my new eyes. Every detail was micro-advanced, from the noise of the warm breeze moving through the leaves, or the livestock in the fields scattering away from the road as our roaring engines crested hills and hollows. Their hooves and trotters crunching the soft earth. I could hear the crumbling of the earthy deposits as they were crushed to dust by the animals' sheer weight. Their heavy breaths too as they made for a quieter place on the land. I could feel and hear the rhythmic rumble of my truck's tires as they rolled over the road's surface. Heck, I could smell 1,000 different scents all at once, and then differentiate between them. This new and improved world around me was almost intoxicating, to say the least. We drove on until early morning the next day, only stopping for necessary supplies such as gas or restroom breaks. Then by 7 AM or so the next morning, we rolled onto the outskirts of the park. Alicia said we needed to enter via the northern end of the LBL, as that's the most likely place that Wayne and his team would be. She also mentioned it was the worst end for potential altercations with large species of cryptid, from the famous Dogman to the legend of the European immigrants who possessed the power to transform into a wolfman and fled into the national park, right down to the large specimens of squatch and skinwalkers. I grabbed my two-way radio and asked, "Why is the northern end like this?" I asked, puzzled a little. "Because that's the thickest of the vegetation and the forests. The terrain there is harsher and much more difficult to traverse, thus less humans fumbling their way into your nest," she responded over the crackling two-way receiver. "Oh, I see," I replied. "Yeah, we're going to have to roll in for about 5 miles, then park and hide our trucks, and then we're going to have to hike the remaining distance to our rendezvous with Wayne and his guys," Alicia added. Chapter 7, Back on the Farm. Riz awoke with a heavy head as the morning's rays of light cut their way through his dusty bedroom. He glanced at the alarm clock and it read 6:05 AM. "Ah, darn it," he cursed. "Another late night equals another late morning. Man, I can do better." Riz made his way over to the restroom basin and soaked his rough time-wrinkled face. Dry enough with a hand towel, he took a good look at the old man he had become. Years of territory defences and hard laborious farm work had taken its toll on the young man that he used to be, all those years ago when he and his brother D had first arrived. He sighed aloud and made his way to the wardrobe to get dressed. "Hey boss," came the booming voice of Hawk from downstairs in the kitchen. Riz grumbled to himself and made his way downstairs to meet up with Hawk and see what the fuss was about. When Riz got to the bottom of the stairs, suddenly he was met with a terrible odour and could see Hawk outside on the rear decking looking towards something. What's up, Hawk?" asked Riz aloud as he covered his mouth and nose to shield away the awful musky odour assaulting his nostrils. 6 more hesitant steps and all became ground shakingly clear. There, some 100 yards out, towards the tree line, hanging high on the electricity pylon, was one of the farm's prize horses. Well, what remained of the mighty beast. Its head was missing, and its front legs and one back leg were wrapped up in the grid power lines some 35 meters in the air. "Well, how in the hell did he get up there?" questioned Riz while scratching his rough chin. Hawk remained silent and held a worried look in his eyes. "I told you they were getting bolder. I'm telling you now, something has got them riled up." "Oh, come on, brother, we've been through this. They ain't been seen for over 5 years this month. Even then, it was a glancing observation," replied Riz, still bemused by the sight, but not letting his mind wander to the whats and hows. "Well, someone's going to have to call the grid services and let them know so they can come and remove him, and we'll get to burying him as soon as possible." "Okay, brother, but you need to take a closer look around the boundaries. All the signs are there, and whether you like it or not," Hawk added as he got onto his quad bike and headed westward towards his family property on the west side of the farmland. It had been 25 years since the assault on the farmhouse, yet it only seemed like days had passed whenever he thought back to those dark nights in the Pax forest. Hawk and my dad, Riz and Dee together questioned the last remaining members of Agent Monroe's task force that had planned on capturing the Alpha and as many of the pack as they could, for goodness knows what reasons. And Hawk eventually persuaded the man to cough up the secret and supposed secure location that his wife and children and myself and Mum were being kept. And of course they swooped in and saved us all, or I wouldn't be here now telling all of this, would I? As time went on and the farm settled back to a normal-ish farm-like schedule, we got back to harvesting crops and farming livestock. As my mum and dad got older, they moved and settled down onto the Florida Keys in some cushy condo right on the beach. And Dad was reluctant at first, but eventually he knew his days of ploughing fields and raising livestock had come to a close. As for the pack, well, they were quiet for a time, and years went by before any sightings or troublesome events occurred. From time to time, neighbouring farmers would report strange howls and the odd slaughtered farm animal, but nothing too obvious. Dee, Riz and Hawk and my dad had tried to track them through the thick forest and Hollis, but eventually they lost the trail. Hawk put in some calls to some guys in the know and tried to trace them from a mapping perspective. He had a connection with all sorts of satellite imagery, equipment and maps covered in red tacks, pinpointing every hiker disappearance to supposed bear attack. And to a degree it worked. Hawk noted an increase in disappearances out towards the Shawnee National Forest, always deep within the forest and remote locations. He surmised that the new Alpha had led his remaining pack members to the new territory in hopes of regrouping, building his own strength and building a stronger, smarter pack of dogmen. Hence the sudden increase in the hiker or unsuspecting camper disappearances. After a year or so, the numbers returned to normal, and Hawk traced their migration through the veins of the Evergreens up to the Hoosier National Forest, where once again the rate of missing people suddenly spiked. Honestly, if you didn't suspect something was up with the drastic increase in the figures, then you were probably lying or brain dead. Of course, it was useless calling it in to the local officials, who would either fob us off as wackos or threaten to arrest us for wasting police time. And so the authorities were ignoring the spike, or they just hoped the pack would move on, as these creatures often do. Hoping that the creatures would cover their territory spanning hundreds of miles, but it appeared that the pack had settled for the long run as the disappearances continued to occur. Almost 10 whole years went by without so much as a growl, howl or dead animal laying around the farm, and to be honest, we had started to believe that it really was the last we would see of that pack. Oh, how wrong we were. As the 10th anniversary of the farm siege was almost upon us, we were prepping for a big cookout, with most of our neighbours coming over for the night of celebrations. Dad and Mum both deciding to retire to Florida Keys, and myself, Dee and Riz were to take over the farm with Hawk's careful guidance. And with the party in full effect and good food and greater times being had by all, one of the guests had to leave early and head on home. As Mr. and Mrs. Buchanan rolled on down the dusty drive, a chill was in the air that was not there moments before. but given the past 10 years of calm and tranquility, none of us suspected what would happen next. As the beloved couple made their way further and further away from our farm, back towards their own some 15 miles away, their small truck was rammed off the road and ploughed straight into the trees on the embankment. Mr. Buchanan's body remains were found half devoured some 45 yards away, scattered among the pines. He had gone through the window screen of the truck. His wife Miriam Buchanan was still inside the truck, seemingly crushed by the impact of the tree against the engine of the truck. And although pinned, it seemed that she was in fact still conscious for a moment or two, and strange fibres of coarse black hair were found clutched in her hands. It was as if she was struggling to fight off a large animal. Of course, all of the tests of the said hair was inconclusive, i.e. they had no known match in the DNA database, and she too had been partially consumed, with all of her soft tissue and most organs missing when authorities arrived at the scene. And of course they played it down and tried to cover it up as Mr. Buchanan had been drink driving, and a deer had crossed in front of them, causing him to react badly and run the truck off the roadside. Around 30 people who attended the gathering said that they saw him not consume any alcoholic beverages, and in fact he was strictly drinking Diet Coke. I know, a crime in itself. Again, the masses accepted the fate of the couple as that of which was printed and reported on the news channels. But we all knew much better than that. And for the months that passed after this event, everyone was on edge, just waiting for it all to start up again. But truth be told, that was a one-off. Certainly from what we could tell, there was no further threats or horrid crime scenes nearby. I mean, sure, every now and then something like a whole henhouse would be massacred, and we'd find them headless and their blood sucked dry from their limp, deflated carcasses. Or one of us might catch a glimpse of tall dark ears moving from side to side slowly through the canopy of the tree line. But on the whole, it was never really as threatening as before. We knew they were there, or at least some of them were there. And perhaps the new Alpha had sent a scout pack to investigate us, or perhaps the pack split and a younger male had taken his own pack and set up home just outside of our land. As for my Uncle D, well, he turned out to be not as nice as we all thought he was. Over the first 8 or so years, he turned his hand to alcohol and eventually was siphoning money out of the farm and renting out parts of the land to would-be Dogman hunters. All in all, he became intolerable and a complete liability. It was a sad day when Riz kicked his ass off the farm, but I believe it was for the best as he couldn't be trusted, no matter what we'd all been through together. Alas, time moved on and Riz became his own man and ran a tight schedule, until his heart was broken by some chick. Now he too had turned to the bottle, but he was a fighter and he knew he had to do better. Which leads us to the present day once more. Now, a 1,600-pound animal was headless some 35 meters up an electrical pylon. And I think it's safe to say our problem may have returned. Chapter 8. Wayne's World. Alicia and Owen pulled over and drove straight into some thick scrub brush, and I followed in my Toyota close behind until we were fully covered by the dense thicket and trees. Alicia explained that Wayne and his team should be within a 5-mile radius of our current position. The last she had spoken to him was the night before, and Wayne and his team were hot on the heels of Ivan. They believed they had tracked him into a deep hollow some 4 or 5 miles off the beaten tracks that most park visitors would take. Even those visitors would be of the highest of skilled climbers and seasoned campers who were used to such hostile terrain. Apparently, Ivan had been causing all manner of problems for the park officials, and in doing so had attracted the attention of multiple government agencies. Now overwhelmed by the attention, he had been forced into the deepest parts of the LBL. We made note of our equipment and weaponry, and then Alicia led us through the thickets and underbrush until we picked up a small game trail. It was barely visible to the untrained eye, but luckily I had plenty of game hunting experience with my pops. I nodded silently, agreeing to follow on as Alicia took a more defensive approach. And slowly, we followed with Owen in the middle of us both. He was checking his dad's GPS position on Google Maps and every now and then would whisper an instruction to his mother. All the while, Alicia kept a hawk-like eye on our surroundings. The further we trekked on and up the slow incline of the terrain, the weather had turned nasty as hails of icy wind and sheets of rain fell from the heavens above. And after a few hours of hiking up and down hills and hollows, We stopped near an overhang of rock, gathering ourselves from the unrelenting downpour that seemed to seep into all and any available space in our clothing. As we crouched, trying to gain bearing on where we were in relation to Wayne's team, I pointed out that there were some strange markings on the rock wall some 10 or so meters away. They looked to be scratches that were long and deep, a set of 3 to be exact. Alongside these scratches were paintings or depictions of, from what I can only guess, long ago battles with demonic creatures, beholding dark spirits born of the land's blood-soaked past. It was almost as if the creatures or whatever made the scratches was here, and then a group of natives marked the scratches with these cryptic depictions of battle, as a warning for weary travellers such as ourselves. I pointed the markings out to Alicia and Owen to see what they made of it all. The response was not what I was expecting. Then a strange faint odour hit my nostrils, and within seconds my instincts were on alert. Something wasn't right. Very suddenly, Alicia was up and scanning the surrounding tree line and thicket, her eyes squinting and searching high and low for goodness knows what. Shh! She gestured to us both. Owen got up and walked slowly over to my position, closer to the markings. He traced his small hand along the lines, scraped into the rock face. His eyes then widened as he inspected the warning scripture, barely visible in the waning light amongst the thick canopy above us. He turned to me with a look of, "Oh shit," and then turned to his mum to say something, but it was no use. Within a millisecond of him opening his mouth to speak, another voice called out some 20 or so yards away from deep in the brush. My heart leapt as the strange otherworldly voice called once more, and I made tangent of what was said. "Help me," it cried. It cried this with the most mournful tone and chilling cadence. Alicia then turned to face the direction of which it came, readying her rifle and nodding to me and Owen. Owen then whispered, "It's a skinwalker's nest area, Mum," he said with terror etched on his whisper. "Quiet," Alicia scolded him under her breath as her eyes were wild with intent to survive and intent to protect her baby. Again came a voice, but this one was a deeper and almost satanical, raspy low octave croaked out like an old redneck. "I've got 'em, boys!" And there was a sudden burst of footfalls from the left of us through the brush and then up in the canopy of the trees. It was followed immediately by another that circled us and stopped on the opposite side. "Screw this," remarked Alicia before she unloaded a quick successive burst of rounds into the general vicinity the last burst had come from. And there was an almighty howling like a bull elk dying a slow and painful death. I kept my eyes trained on the treetops above us, as the first one was definitely trying to get a drop on us. An evil cackling rang out across the hills and echoed around the hollow we were in. "There's going to be 3 of them, or maybe more. I don't know why, but they always turn up in 3s, said Owen, as he started to make a copy of the markings and drawings covering a section of the rock wall. Without warning, an enormous creature resembling something between a wolf and a bear came crashing down onto my back, causing me to spin and try to chuck the great beast off of me. It sank its disgusting teeth into my shoulder, and I cried out in pain. I willed my transformation, and within seconds I grabbed my assailant by the throat, threw it up and over my shoulders, and smashed its face into the rocks around my feet. It made a gnarly, gargle, choking sound, slowly dying off as the last of its life was drained from its fetid carcass. "Well, that's one of them," I said aloud as I was met with a response. A maniacal cackling erupted from all around us. As it was now apparent we were slowly being surrounded, with my transformation I could now start to pick up on each of our targets' positions. I could hear their gasping and eerie breaths as saliva dripped from each of their maws. Alicia looked shocked at how quickly we had been surrounded, and fired another burst of rounds into the canopy and surrounding tree line. She must have hit a couple of them as multiple shrieks and wails of agony cried out among the lonely wilderness. And then the chaos ensued. All at once they charged us, and all we could do was put our backs to the rock wall and open fire. As the first wave of 4 or more came through the trees, Owen was picking them off with headshots like it was practice hour. Using a titanium, high-grade compound bow, he was silent and effective. Myself, I chose to remain in my beast-like form and slaughter as many of these skinwalkers as I could. 2 came at me at once, and I ripped the first one in half at the waist and chewed its face off. Throwing ahead of the oncoming attacker, he caught its head. A look of amusement and, "Oops, I messed up here," sat upon his face like a neon sign. He made one final battle cry as I severed his throat to the spinal cord with my razor-sharp talons, his decrepit carcass falling limply to the ground. Within seconds, I was blindsided by a bulky specimen of what I could only make out to be an elk and a fox. My face met the dirt as I was tackled, and then there was a loud discharge of a Remington 12-gauge, pump action. 2 shots fired just above my own head, taking a heavy skinwalker's head clean off his shoulders, and leaving a spewing, gargling mess to fall down. I looked to see Owen rubbing his shoulder from the kickback of the large gun. It seems like it worked too, as they stopped advancing on us and took to the treetops to watch us from a safe distance, at least until they could come up with some sort of plan. We all rested with our backs against the wall. I gathered the dead, rotting carcasses and then threw them some distance out of our refuge. "We should make camp and a fortification. It looks like we're here for a while. Ain't no point in us trying to carry on hiking through. They'll just pick us off if we do," remarked Alicia as she gathered some more wood, and I set about creating a blind wall of brush and branches, something that might give us a few seconds between being grabbed and dragged off into the deeper parts of this cursed forest. Or not. I built the perimeter wall as high as I could, so it would give us plenty of protection from the cold wind that was whipping its way through the hills and hollows. With the high wall and overhanging rock wall, it was pretty cozy. Well, except for the bloodthirsty skinwalkers stalking at every move. Nightfall eventually set in and things progressively worsened. From our position deep in the hollow, we couldn't reach any of Wayne's team on the 2-way radio or through Owen's cell phone. The weather had not improved at all, and the forecast was for more heavy rain all weekend. The trail we had come upon was now a slick river of mud and debris. Thankfully, our rocky position was fairly high up in comparison to the rest of the hollow that was visible on our way in. Alicia decided that we would be better to grab Wayne's attention if he hadn't already come in search of what all the ruckus was about with the skinwalkers. She suggested we fire a red flare into the night sky and hopefully that would draw his attention. Myself and Owen nodding in agreement whilst keeping our eyes on our new neighbours. Now that night had blanketed the land, I could make out eyeshine from various heights and positions. The skinwalker's eyes never left mine, nor did they blink or move. Each one was slightly different. Whether it be in hue or size, they each had something different about them. I questioned whether it could be the small amount of human that may still reside deep within their cold, unbeaten hearts. Could it be the natural colour of their former human selves, still holding on to the threads of their own souls? The eyes were from deep greens to beautiful bright blues, and then of course there was the bright, burning reds and oranges. They were the most troubling as we sat there watching them watch us. I wondered, could it be that the red and the orange eyes were those that had gone fully feral, past the point of return, if one even existed? We had lit 3 small fires and placed them in a sort of triangular position to ourselves. Each took a side and we spoke little that evening as well. Eventually, after hours of a standoff, some of these bastards relented and made their way back into God knows where, back into the deepest bowels of the LBL park. Only the most oppressive remained hidden, save for their glaring eyeshine. As midnight rolled around, and with the ever-impending doom surrounding us, Alicia made the decision to fire the flare. As she did so, the bleak, wet and rainy night's gloom was lifted to an ominous red glow. For a brief moment, the eyes became faces, and we could make out around 15 or so figures desperately trying to shield their eyes from the glow of the flare as it sailed high up into the night sky. Before seconds later, once again we were plummeted into almost complete darkness. Only the crackling of our campfires accompanying our heart beats. A cackling erupted again from our right side, some 30 or more meters away, and it was answered by another to our 12 o'clock. A soft but heavy crunching of dead leaves and twigs sounded like the chorus to our death's symphony. As each step almost echoed through my bestial advanced hearing, I pinpointed the skinwalker's position in seconds and fired off a quick burst of rounds. We heard its crumpled carcass hit the ground in a heap seconds later as the shots echoed off the hills and hollows. "I think they're making their move," I whispered as more and more slow but calculated steps broke the silence that had consumed the forest around us. Suddenly, as two skinwalkers burst through the brush, coming straight for us, there was a quick successive burst of other gunfire, then another, and then one final large caliber round went off, ending the sudden attempt to attack us and sending the forest back into an eerie silence. The sounds of multiple footfalls leaving the area responded all around us, even from up on top of the rock face where we were hiding. They must have been trying to sneak up on us by drawing our attention to our 12 o'clock position. But who the hell was that firing upon them? I thought aloud. Moments later I heard, "We're clear?" from just outside the fire's light. It was responded immediately by a thick English accent with, "Clear." And then we were suddenly joined by two behemoths of men, both dressed in tactical gear, blacked out from head to toe. Alicia's face lit up as she recognized it was her husband, Wayne, and his crewman, Jimmy. Wayne eyed me as he and Alicia embraced, and he messed up Owen's hair as they all greeted each other and shared a family moment. It was quite beautiful, although surreal given our current position. "I'm so glad you could make it, honey," said Alicia as she cuddled up to Wayne. "Did you see our flare, Dad?" asked Owen excitedly. Yes, we saw the flare, but we also heard the gunfight. Just what are you guys doing out here anyway? You can't be having all the fun now, can you?" Wayne jokingly said as he patted Owen on the back. "Well, that was a little too close for my liking. I mean, why was there so many of them? Usually it's 3 or 4, not 20 or more," quizzed Alicia, looking baffled. "Well, we suspect that Ivan has been throwing his weight around. We know he's been starting a darn war with a new alpha for the LBL Dogman pack. Hell, he's been slaughtering the young and any female hunting parties he can find. My guess is these are the cryptids, the skinwalkers and such," said Wayne as he scratched his chin stubble. "They probably know he's here and feel more comfortable in numbers. Possibly a good observation for herd mentality in those that are usually seldom loners," he added. Then finally, as all the dust had settled and the reunion was done, Wayne turned to me and asked, "And who are you, bud?" I introduced myself, and then Alicia interjected my special circumstance. To say he wasn't overly happy about my presence from that point on would be an understatement. But I'm glad to tell you that I earned his trust and camaraderie later on down the line. But we'll get to that later. And so, the 5 of us set about getting to know what had been missed, also why Ivan was here and attacking everything he saw, also why those cryptids banding together. All of this was a lot for me to take in, all in such a short amount of time. I suddenly felt overwhelmed by everything that I had to deal with, all the choices that had been made without my say-so, all the horrible situations I would find myself caught up in the near future and distant. Chapter 9. Taking it for a test drive. So, as everyone settled down for the nights with one on watch, I decided I needed a run. I needed to clear my head, and so I left camp and transformed to my great bestial form. Launching myself off the cliff edge above a piney forest below, I closed my eyes and landed with a heavy thump. I was, of course, absolutely fine in a semi-crouched position. I mean, it was instinctual how I landed. I didn't plan it. It just played out that way. It was then that I realized that I had not tried to gain knowledge of the full extent of my abilities. I breathed in a deep, bellowing breath that filled my huge lungs with icy, crisp air. The scent of pine needles was breathtaking. And then the urge to just run. It overtook me. To run like there was no tomorrow and bound from rocky ledge to long high-up tree branches, scouting the land below me. It's then, ladies and gentlemen, that I realized all of my motives, all of what I was expressing right then and there were leading up to one thing: my first hunt. There, some 100 or so yards away, was a huge wild hog, bedded down with a number of its litter. The wind changed in that moment as if God himself was giving his blessing and ringing the dinner bell. Ding, 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 ding. The scent of the family of hogs wafted through the night's air on the softest of breezes. My stomach ached and moaned for flesh and substance, and something else was there. But But this wasn't coming from my stomach, no. This was more embodied in my psyche, or the beast's psyche. And as I watched from my aerial viewpoint, I wanted violence. I wanted that hog to put up a real fight to the death. And in doing so, of course, it would seal its death, but I cared only if it was in a violent manner. I leapt from the high-up position on the tall pine tree. Its enormous trunk bending for such a long period under my own enormous bulk left it lopsided. After I launched myself free from its sturdy arms, the same happened with the next that I landed onto, a bit too heavily. As I leapt from this one, it sprang back and then stayed, also laying lopsided. This time, they kind of formed an X of sorts in the treetops. Looked kind of cool, I don't know. Anyway, I leapt my way closer to the family of sleeping hogs. I made my way till I sat just outside of their den. And then, with a yank on the big bull's back trotter, I yanked him outside of their bedding and into the basking moonlight. As the dust settled around, he was up in seconds, huffing and grunting and snorting in a defensive manner. His alarmed sibilance, squilling in fright and panic, was one of the worst sounds you could hear. But at that precise moment, during my first ever real hunt for food, I loved every freaking second of it. I languished in the blood and severed limbs as the larger of the hogs tried their very best to attack me and stop my insane slaughter. But soon it was over as I crushed the throat of the last adult hog and punched through its chest to retrieve its heart. And in one huge gulp, I ate the still steaming heart and set about consuming the majority of them. A cold and normal unsettling silence had set in all around me, and it was then that I realized it was because of me. I was the monster in the woods. When I was eventually finished, I ran for a few more miles until I was tired and satisfied with getting to grips with my new form out here in the wilderness. I found a beautiful pond and washed myself off of the disgusting entrails and lumps of fat clinging to my chest and shoulders. And as I leaned over to bathe my face, my reflection was met with my eyes for the first time as the monster I now was looked back with a wicked smile across his maw. I was covered all over my head and face, my long snout and shoulders all painted in a gruesome blood red or dried blood weird orange colour. I immediately felt guilty and so washed and scrubbed like crazy. And then, slowly bringing myself back up and out of the water, I looked again and most of it was washed away. I was in fact quite pleased with my new form. I looked darn scary, and any normal human would either run a mile or put a gun on me. At least that lowered the usual ratio of assholes, I thought. As I stepped back out of the quiet pond, I noticed that I was not alone out here as I previously assumed. As I cast my eyes to the north of my position, I could make out 3 sets of eyes, all black as the night itself, but shone or sparkled like black marbles. I didn't know nor want to know who they belonged to, but I sure as heck wasn't waiting around to find out. I growled a deep, rumbling growl that I hoped sent them, or whoever they were, the perfect message. I just washed up, don't make me get all bloody again. And so I leapt my way back towards Wayne and Alicia's camp, making sure to take a few twists and turns to throw off any would-be trackers or whatever. The sun would be up in less than 3 hours, and I didn't want them to distrust me in any way. Chapter 10. In the Bowels of Hell. Soon I was back and checked in with Jimmy, who was on watch. He was sat against a tall pine, smoking a cigarette and humming a tune I couldn't discern. He seemed like a cool guy, almost too cool. It turned out that Jimmy was from London in the UK. He'd found a new calling in life and knew what he was good at, finding those that don't want to be found and killing. He combined the two and has since been travelling the world in search of problem cryptids. Well, that's what he called them. Within the hour of meeting Jimmy, you felt like you had known him your whole life. He was in his element in these type of situations, as he recalled many of a past operation that he and also Wayne had been involved in. He had no wife nor kids, no siblings at all. All that he had was his best friend and his wife back at home in the UK. That and going on killing sprees, or as I would call it, culling sprees. But truth be told, after knowing him all of these years later, I know he's a good guy but a huge heart who wouldn't harm a fly unless it gave him reason, then, well, heaven help the flies. Upstairs, Jimmy definitely had a few screws loose, but it was never anything that would have impaired him or the operation he was tasked with. If anything, Jimmy's famous craziness gave him a die-hard edge that was hard to match. Morning broke through the darkness and the heavy mist rolled into camp. The forest inhabitants' chirps and scurries were back, and this eased our nerves greatly. Taking stock of supplies and further inspection of the camp's boundaries, we found multiple bipedal prints circling out and around through the brush. The dead were also now missing, and I wondered if the skinwalkers were cannibalistic in nature, or if they recovered their dead comrades for burial elsewhere. It mattered little to me, but it was an interesting thought nonetheless. Wayne gathered us together as we plotted out our next route, and we were to meet with his recon team southeast of our current position. It was an arduous task, but one I felt eager to accomplish ASAP. I figured the more of us there was, then the higher chance we had of not coming into any unwanted conflict. As we left the area, I finally got a good look at our surrounding landscape through bare patches in the flora. In the daylight, the landscape was breathtaking. After many long and normally exhausting hours of hiking, we found a small opening to a cave system. Outside was an old campfire pit, some discarded shell cartridges, and various other miscellaneous items. "This is where we tracked Ivan to 3 days ago," said Wayne. "Yeah, he booked it after Mickey and Dino got a drop on him," Jimmy added with ecstatic enthusiasm. His whole character was very animated. You could see how much he truly lived for these types of hunts. "So where's your team?" I questioned. "They went on in ahead of us. We had the boys at CRI, that's Cryptid Response Intelligence, conduct a deep subsurface scan. It's now mapped out over 100 miles of subterranean chambers and tunnels. Some are completely submerged in water and others, well, unknown," Wayne clarified confidently as Jimmy nodded. "You're gonna need this in there. Don't activate it until we get inside and it's dark, or you end up burning out your damn eyeballs," laughed Jimmy as he passed me a night vision optics headset. Alicia and Owen already had theirs at the ready from their backpacks, and that's when I noticed Alicia was looking at something interesting, a set of runes carved into the rock face outside of the cave entrance. "What you got, Alicia? Anything interesting?" I asked as I made my way over to meet her eyes and where they were studying the wall of granite. "Well, I'm not too sure, but it looks like a tribe's warning, or possibly they use this place as a place of punishment. But as I say, I'm not sure." Owen then came over to us and had a look at the strange rune markings. Drawing for his trusty PDA, he took a couple of digital photos and sent those through a search engine on his device. "Let me just try something," he said, as he seemed to wrangle pure magic working his high-tech piece of equipment. "Aha!" he exclaimed. "I got something," he added. Taking a closer look, it appeared to match 3 results. 2 were viewed as Alicia had assumed, to mark that these tunnels and chambers, in the dark and gloomy underground, were in fact for sending unworthy ones, people who had brought shame or bad influence amongst the tribe. The remaining room search result leaned more towards this being a warning to tell travellers who might be seeking shelter inside the bowels of this immense cave system. The results were not 100%, but, in my opinion, the latter of the results was on the money. I believed it was a warning not to venture further ahead, no matter how the purpose for entering such a realm of unknown may present itself. "Okay, let's move on in, and keep your heads on a swivel. There's lots of hiding spots and pockets for something might reach out and try and snatch you up. The guy should be in a large cathedral-like chamber, 600 meters down and through a little route known as the Devil's Throat. There's lots of hot steam vents constantly blowing up, so it's pretty bad as far as the distance of your eyesight's capability. But after about 200 meters or more, it clears out into the cathedral. Okay, everyone?" Wayne said as he flipped his night vision optics headset down over his face and proceeded to take the lead point. Jimmy nodded at me and gestured for me to follow, also allowing Owen and Alicia to follow in behind whilst he covered our 6. As we descended deeper and deeper down into the heart of the hollows, the temperature remained warm as geysers of moist air kept bellowing from deeper within unknown nooks and crannies. It took me a while to adjust to the ominous green glow of the night vision, and I tripped and stumbled over many outcroppings as we went further down into the Devil's Throat. My hand fumbling for reassurance and balance found a cold and unforgiving wet surface, where there felt to be some thick and extremely bad-smelling algae or lichen clinging to the shaft's walls, but we had bigger things to be concerned with. After about an hour or more, we finally found the shaft started to flatten out to a more pleasant degree, until eventually the claustrophobic tunnel that seemed to be endless finally opened up in a mind-blowing manner, one I was not prepared for. The cathedral, as Wayne and Jimmy had called it, was absolutely spectacular as the walls on either side rose upward, soaring into the air on all sides of us. It was so large, in fact, that small pockets of mist or possibly clouds were hanging and drifting carelessly through the air above us. The ceiling was jagged and unruly in its natural construction, towering above and left a large craterous hole where long soft drapes of sunlight sliced through the mist and darkness. And there was a few nesting birds flying in and out and soaring on the hot thermals rising from the cavernous floor. The bottom of the cathedral formed into a bowl formation of sorts, and with a few ginormous boulders no doubt long ago falling from the heavens above us. Some 80 or so yards was a small camp set up among 3 large boulders. There was 2 or 3 box tents and some desks and supplies circled around. "Aha! There they are," said Jimmy, pointing down towards the camp. Jimmy whistled down towards our fellow lunatics as we made our way, one by one, over the rocks and down steep embankments, finally arriving at base camp for what I hoped would be the night. I had lost my concept on time already. I had to check my watch to see what time we had made it from our original perilous camp, 7:45 p.m. I made note of the time and went to meet with the rest of the team. I only hoped that they were as understanding and trusting of my abrasion, my curse, my condition. Back at the farm. Chapter 11. The Harvest Moon. Let's get straight into that. As night fell that evening, the whole feeling of dread and guilt racked my household. My kids were upset, Riz was spooked, and even Hawk struggled to have that classic calmness that he always seemed to possess. The land and everything in it knew that now the problem had again returned. Now the bloodbath would gain momentum until only one conclusion existed. If we were going to live on this land, if we are going to die on this land, then by God's eyes as my witness, I'm taking every damn one of them first. I wasn't about to see my best friends and my family suffer any more than I already had to. Even in the common of the years gone by, the loss of a loved one weighs heavy on my soul. The sky that night graced us with a striking blend of warm oranges and purples that were slowly consumed by a veil of the deepest of blacks, until the silence that seemed to knock at the back of my mind constantly was all that accompanied us. After our experience before, Hawk and I had invested heavily in outdoor lighting. We had a set of strong floodlights on a trip system. Motion-activated cameras were in place throughout the property of some 700 acres. And when I say we had a great grasp on what was occupying our land, I mean it. If it was too far for us to track or see without actually going out there, we'd have it on one or more of the cameras. It was pretty impressive, but 100% necessary. Around 1:15 in the morning, it began. And at first my ears were not picking anything up at all. But we had 2 large French bull mastiffs called Sharky and George. Also, we had 1 English bull terrier called Scrappy. Well, it was because of them that we even had an inkling of anything remotely wrong. Big George was up in seconds and made a deep, rumbling low growl. Now, I don't know if any of you have had big dogs, but as I was sat there watching some crappy TV show and George made that darn deep noise out of nowhere, I swear my soul left my body and it was sucked back in. He'd grumble and growl now and then, but this was different. It resonated through my chest, and as soon as he made that sound, Sharky was up too. I caught my breath and paused the TV. Glancing at little Scrappy, he was stretched out without a care in the world, which, for him, was pretty much how you would always find him. Anyway, as the 2 big dogs stood rigid and to attention, there, off some ways on our land, was a chilling howl. Big George and Sharky whined and their ears went back flat against their heads. The fur around their shoulders and back bristled up and they began to shake with adrenaline, or was it excitement? Or perhaps it was fear. Perhaps they knew exactly what had arrived. The strange but not unfamiliar howl was answered by another to the east of us, and another two more sounded off somewhere elsewhere. It sounded like a cross between an air raid siren and a wolf, and possibly even a bull elk. The two dogs suddenly very slowly parted ways to either side of the house, one going into the front room and the other into our washroom, by the back door. Grabbing my trainers and slipping out of the kitchen, I made my way to the bottom of the stairs, where I was met by a very worried-looking Riz. He was already halfway down the stairs to meet me, in the kitchen, I guess, but he looked more worried than I was at that time. It wasn't much longer before I would find out why, when from outside the washroom came a dry crunching on the gravel. Now, me and Hawk and Riz had installed it all around the house. It would help us hearing anything large that might approach the house. And then there was an all-out, insane barking of George from within the tiny utility room. The clattering of his nails as he jumped up against the wooden door. And suddenly, a menacing growl answered his barks and he cowered away for a second, looking at me for an answer. George? He was tougher than a darn grizzly. But it appeared that this night he had finally met his match. I patted my knees, signalling for him to come and stand between my legs, and he followed orders beautifully. More crunching of gravel from around the other side of the utility room walls. Suddenly a thick, musky smell soon started to permeate through any opening, and it was disgusting. Stagnant ditch water and bloody offal would be one way to describe it, I guess. Anyway, it, or more likely they, then started throwing small pieces of gravel or whatever else they fancied at the windows and walls. I just hoped the cats were okay and had found shelter far away from the house tonight. "Where's Hawk?" I whispered to Riz as we opened one of our many gun cabinets throughout the house. I settled on my 12-gauge pump action with poisoned laced shot. If the initial blast didn't put them down, then the aggressive poison would later. Riz whispered back that he was unsure. "I think he's over at the clubhouse. I'll call his wife and let her know to lock down the house," he added. "Shit," I answered as a chilling realization sunk to the bottom of my stomach. The clubhouse, as we called it, was our man cave, with full entertainment systems and a bar, etc. If he was in there, he was on his own, with God knows how many of these creatures lurking and surrounding us. Plus, it was not as fortified as the main house. "What are we gonna do?" I asked as Riz checked the chamber on his Colt Python. 357. Grabbing extra ammunition, we made our way to the front room where Sharky was still pacing back and forth, watching the sizable bay window. And just then, a large, looming, tall, shadowy figure crossed in front of the heavy curtain of the window. The outside trip lights washed it with bright, fluorescent light, and the heavy curtain concealing our presence, it gave an almost Hammer House horror vibe. Except this wasn't a movie, nor a comic book for snotty-nosed teenagers to read by the flashlights under their bed covers at night. No, this was something all too familiar, and my breathing was already heavy and my brow wet with perspiration. I kept my eyes trained on a large hairy figure that walked with purpose, as if trying to seek a weakness in our fortification. The outside of the windows and doors all fitted with reinforced metal bars. If it wanted to get in, I'm sure it would have no issue in ripping them from their moorings, but I'd fill it with hot lead before that happened, or be dead doing so. And Riz had also installed a little extra surprise for any attempt from an intruder. He had wired all of the windows and doors defences with the mains of the house, and so, at the click of a button, we could arm the bars on the windows and doors with 500 volts of Zeus juice. The large figure sniffed around the window and growled in front for what must have been 5 minutes, before slowly popping away out of view to the rest of the house exterior. And by now, George had wandered to my side, and Sharky looked all the happier for it. Riz brought up the cameras and checked me his cell phone to call Hawk. I made the call and listened anxiously as the ringing sounded once, twice, 3 times before Hawk answered. He was breathing heavy and whispering into the cell. I couldn't make out all of what he was saying at the time, but the feeling I got was that he was panicked out of his mind. "They're on the roof and I'm completely..." Something, something, something.
I can hear them calling my name. They sound just like us, man,
he added as his breaths crackled over the receiver on my end of the call.
Okay, Hawk, just sit tight. Don't draw any more attention than you need to. We'll figure something out. I promise, man.
I whispered back, trying to desperately rack my brain for a solution. Bang!
Scrape!
Suddenly, our ears were pierced by agonizing scraping on the metal roofing. Also, they or one individual was hitting the back door. I guess it was likely the one we had just watched through the curtain.
I got visual,
said Riz as he brought up 3 minimalized boxes with a live feed from our cameras. Outside of our rear, at the utility room section, there was 3 large dogmen, varying in height by the looks of the grainy image on screen. A further 4 more were surrounding the house on all sides, and the roof sensors indicated already 2 more were up top. As chilling as this fact was, our situation was much better than Hawk's. As Riz zoomed in on the outhouse and clubhouse, it was clear that they had sensed the clubhouse being weaker in defences, or perhaps they had just simply smelt the one sole occupant panicking inside. Thank goodness the young uns were all sleeping over at the west of our property at Hawk's house.
Okay, listen, Hawk. We got visual and it's not good, bro. You have at least 6 DMs circling the building, 2 up top and a further number of them concealing themselves in the brush and whatnot.
This is not how I pictured my retirement, young man. Hawk laughed, trying to make light of the situation. Bang, bang, bang. Again came the clanging of metal as the dogmen beat it with their fists and then scratched and tore at the metal roofing. Smash! A huge crashing came from just outside of the front window. I ran to see what it was and could see that they had ripped and thrown parts of our solar panels and equipment from the roof fixtures down to the gravel below. A mighty roar resounded again, but this time right on top of us. Again, it was answered with support from the other pack members. More banging and growling came from the clubhouse, and then Hawk let loose a barrage of gunfire, spraying from a small opening in the wall of the building created for just such an occasion. His actions caused a reaction, and before we could put our heads together and come up with a plan, the pack descended on the building, ripping at any place they could gain purchase, smashing on the caging that was more like an expensive chicken mesh wire than what we had equipped the main household with. The windows behind the mesh shattered, and the siege was on. No time left to think as we watched through the monitor. The remaining dogmen on our location surged towards Hawk's location and a mere 60 meters away.
We have to do something. We gotta help him, Riz,
I screamed as chaos erupted further from the small building. The moon was now high in the sky, casting a blue ambience across the farm, as large dark figures covered in thick coarse black fur ripped off panels and tried to breach through windows and doors. I ran for the gun cabinet again and swapped my 12 gauge for my 30-06 rifle. I swapped out the regular magazine for a ballistic tip round and then hauled ass to the top guest room. The guest room had a balcony, which is why no one ever felt safe sleeping in there. After what we had been through and seen, the idea of giving them a platform with which they could stand and watch us sleep seemed like a joke. Watching me swap out the rounds, Riz asked,
"What in tarnation are you thinking of doing?"
"I have no idea," I offered as I scooted past him and up the stairs.
"Now hold on a second,"
he shouted, but I was gone in a matter of seconds, up to the second floor and through the guest room. I disarmed the doors and unlocking and flinging them open to the balcony, I took sight of the situation once more. It was a refined chaos as flashes from Hawk's AK-47 were disturbing the shadowy night around the clubhouse. The creatures in numbers of I guess 20 plus, all ripping and clambering into the windows only to get stung by a spray of bullets from Hawk's rifle. I could hear him faintly above the roars and growls and gunfire, screaming an old native chant. I questioned whether this was the famous death songs of the Native American legends. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the back door slamming open and shutting again from the rear of the house. I leaned my head back and called Riz's name.
"Riz, you there, bro? Come up here and we can pick up."
Before I could finish that sentence, my words were interrupted by a definitive sound of heavy farm machinery starting up. The telltale rumble and hiss of the diesel engine roaring to life from the side of the main house.
"What the?"
I said aloud
as suddenly the darkness surrounding the clubhouse was bleached in fluorescent white lights, and the ground and foundations of the house shook. Seconds later, there, heading straight for the clubhouse, was Riz in the combine harvester, floodlights in full and the harvester's thresher blades in full throttle spin. Shaking my head in disbelief, I began aiming and firing on the pack as some began to take notice of the incoming lunatic challenger. A few well-placed headshots dropped them where they stood. Some, however, seemed unfazed by my rounds, and they simply continued trying to access or grab up Hawk as he fired upon them. Riz then floored the gas to the floor, and the huge machine roared to life. It lurched forward double time, and the dogmen turned and tried to jump out of the way, but it was too little, too late for them, as the rotating blades tore into the pack out front of the clubhouse. The sharp blades making light work of their flesh and dragging them under. Some became entangled in the harvester's machinery and were being ripped and torn around and round as it spun, cutting down the pack in numbers hugely. Woohoo, yeah! I could hear Riz screaming like a madman as his combine ate these bastards up like it was nothing. Still, the few that were either out of sight or on the roof of the clubhouse, they then began descending onto Riz's right. Some tried to open the door, but he had locked it up and there was some minor protective mesh over the windows. As he circled around for another hit, he was firing off round after round of his Python 357. I could see chunks of muscle and sinew flying off their enormous beast-like torsos. So, all I could do was carry on, locking them off as best I could. Hawk emerged as Riz was coming back around and heading straight for him. He jumped out of the window and was caught off guard from behind as he made his way towards Riz in the harvester. The dogman and he tumbled to the dirt and rustled around, the dogman sinking its canines into Hawk's shoulder with a hungry enthusiasm. The dogman and he tumbled to the dirt and wrestled around, and then the dogman sank its canines into Hawk's shoulder with a hungry enthusiasm. His cry of anguish echoed through the land as his blood stained the earth around him. And with his free hand he unsheathed his short sword and plunged it into the dogman's neck, with a resounding wet thunk. Then he drew it quickly and without hesitation out and away from himself, cutting straight through the back of its neck and shoulders, its lifeless head left gazing up into the starry-filled night. Hawk jumped to his feet, surveying his situation as it unfolded around him. There was 5 more dogmen. 2 were with Riz as he desperately tried to shake them off or shoot them. 3 were now circling Hawk, slowly keeping eye contact with him. Their eyes shone a terrifying red as they were all bathed in bright floodlights. Hawk remained calm as I tried to pick off the 2 attacking Riz inside his cab. They lunged and roared at Hawk with excited thirst for his blood, but he remained calm, keeping an eye constantly on them as he was circled over and over again. Each dogman growling and then lunging with its long hairy arms, the dusty dirt now kicking up as they disturbed the earth around them. All the while, Hawk continued his low chant, and then, without warning, he stopped, leaned back into a defensive position. It reminded me of a Shaolin monk stance in combat. The 3 dogmen rushed him within seconds, and all as one. And from all sides death was coming for him, and there was nothing I or anyone could do for him but watch and pray. It all happened so fast that I had to recount this over and over to try and get my head around what actually happened. As the 3 aggressive, ferocious dogmen rushed Hawk, he remained like a statue, unmoving and unfazable. Within seconds, he sprung and front-flipped the dogman to his right. Before it could turn around, he had sliced right through its face vertically, landing behind the mighty but bested beast as it slumped forward heavily and crashed to the earth, dead. Hawk then spun on his heels and plunged 2 daggers into the stomach of the dogman to his left, drawing them out before slashing crisscross across its torso. It opened up like a darn purse, spilling its internal organs all over my land. The 3rd and final dogman seemed to be a little wiser as it continued to watch and perhaps recalculate its tactics. Once more, the creature roared, standing an easy 8 feet tall. It splayed its long claws out as if to say, "I'm bigger and much more clever than those 2 mutts." It charged Hawk and feinted once to the left and then to the right before leaping right at his throat. Just as it was a mere 6 feet away from Hawk's throat, claws extended and arms ready to grab and rip, Uncle Riz came bursting from the side of them and chewed the beast up and into his own set of jaws. It was shredded into nothing more than unrecognizable chunks of meat. As Riz brought the harvester to a standstill, I rushed downstairs and burst out of the front door onto the decking. And there, standing in a manly one-armed embrace, patting each other on the back whilst laughing, a hearty laugh, was Hawk and Uncle Riz, alive and well. Behind them, the enormous machinery mechanisms covered in chunks of flesh and skin. Goddamn hair was all over the yard too, and broken bones sticking out of odd limbs. Warped and disfigured dogmen heads scattered everywhere. "Thank you both so much," said Hawk breathlessly as we surveyed the land and headed on inside for a strong drink of the devil's water. "You're one crazy son of a bitch, Uncle Riz, but what a great idea. Takes a whole new meaning to the harvest moon," I said as we locked down the house once more. Hawk then called the girls to make sure they were okay, and Riz reset the electric defences. We sat in the kitchen talking over cards and whiskey until the sun came up the next day. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that one as much as I have writing it and narrating it. As ever though, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And of course, why not hashtag Team Fear. Feel free to give me any ideas you want to see included into this storyline in the next few episodes. Just write them down in the comments, or if you want to email me some ideas, please do feel free to get involved. The first series of the LBL was actually a channel involvement story, and a lot of you got involved and gave me some fantastic ideas and scenarios to play with. Above all guys, I hope you're all well and happy and keeping safe out there. And remember, be safe, not sorry.